It's a cube, it's a cube, it's a default cube.
Okay, it's been like a full week since I've recorded anything, so just like listening to the sound of my voice, it's nauseating, and I feel like I'm like focusing on every single word, and the delivery's not natural. Either way, for those of you who don't know, I spent the last week just like walking like 100 miles. You know what? That's an exaggeration. It was 96 miles. I was walking to Old Orchard Beach in Maine because it's like my favorite spot, and I'm like, I've never gone there without taking a train or a car. So I spent the last 6-7 days just walking, pretty much by myself, not talking to anybody. So just like listening to the sound of my voice, it's very weird. And also recording is weird, and also just the feeling of the mouse. It's all weird. Anyways, welcome back everybody to a new tutorial series where in this one, I was thinking during this walk, wouldn't it be cool if I made like an arcade game that plays itself? Automate the last human joy, like playing video games. And that's what I made today. So what you're looking at right now is like a very primitive, I don't know, some kind of like asteroid-based game. You can't shoot, you can't do anything, you just dodge. But the thing plays itself, and it knows where to dodge, and but you know, because it's procedural, I can just change the seed, play it faster, play it slower, and okay, what do I mean when I say it's procedural? Well, here's a blank Blender thing, right? I can add in, let me just go to solid view, just to really show it off. I can just add in a cube. You're thinking, okay, there's a cube, settle down there, buddy. If I just go to geometry nodes and add in my custom game geonodes, which I'll show you how to make, it makes the whole fucking thing. Let's go to rendered view. It makes it. And not only that, we can like randomize the game. So here's a new one, and it's dodging it here, or we could dodge it here. The logic will carry over, and you can play it at any speed. And there's also a couple other controls, like the spread of it, like how, you know, it will always dodge no matter what. The noise, a lot of stuff you can control here. And the whole idea here is like, again, what if you take a game and you automate the shit out of it? So that's what I want to talk about today. Let's just, you know, get started. So a project like this actually has quite a bit going on, right? We not only need to give the logic to the ship, like how do you avoid the obstacle? Like long story short, we say if there's an asteroid, go the other way. But we also have to make the asteroids, the ship. We need to make it feel game-like. There's a lot, you know, going on here. So I'm thinking let's take it step by step. The first thing we can do is make our asteroid generator, or maybe not the generator, but just like, you know, we make a bunch of asteroids in random positions, and we have the ship dodge them, I think. So let's do that for this one. So I'm going to save this. I'm going to call it, what am I going to call it? Awkward. Awkward. How do you spell awkward? The spelling of awkward, in fact, is awkward. Is that what the higher-ups were planning? What am I looking for? Awkward, dumb project. Beautiful. Okay. We're gonna get started. So, first order of business is how do we generate a bunch of asteroids? Well, what I'm thinking is we make a geometry nodes thing. I'm just gonna call this game. And we need a bunch of asteroids in a line, but kind of in random position. So let's start with a mesh line. And by the way, yes, I have already made this before, clearly, like I showed you the project. But that doesn't mean I remember how to do this. So I'm like ready to fully embarrass myself. It's always scary going into a tutorial without like memorizing the whole thing. So I made a mesh line. It's basically just a line primitive going from 0, 0, the origin, to 1, right on the x-axis. We can pick how far that goes. And it's going to have 10 vertices. So if we were to go to wireframe, or not wireframe, you can't really see the points, can you? But you can see in the spreadsheet, we do in fact have 10 points going along here at position 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, just going down the line, okay? And what I want you to imagine is for each of these points, actually you don't need to imagine. They always say show, don't tell in school. And then they proceed to tell for the next 16 years of your academic career. You ever think about that? We're going to instance on points what may be a UV sphere for now. Eventually, we'll make asteroids. But you can see if we make them smaller, we have a line. And on that line, there's points and on the points, we have asteroids. Okay? And you just got to imagine they look good. So the name of the game, basically, is randomizing this in a way it's not like fully random. Like we need to be able to extract this data so that we can have the ship dodge. And that's kind of what I struggled with. So as I was like doing this walk, and I'm just gonna, passively do this in the background. As I was doing this walk, the whole time, not the whole time, that'd be crazy, but for a couple hours, I was literally building this node network in my head. That's what happens when you use Blender a lot. You start like being like, yes, I have free time. No, let me just imagine imagine nodes in my head, and the method I came up with didn't end up working, so I had to keep playing around with it. So what I'm doing here is I'm taking our line of points. I'm saying I'm going to reset the position to what? Well, currently we're just using the position field, so nothing changes. So I'm saying move it where? Back to where what? Nothing happens. But if we manipulate this with some vector math, you can see, wow, we can move the points up and down. Specifically on the y-axis is what we care about. X-axis, z-axis, we don't care about it. Y-axis is where it's at. So somehow I was like thinking, how do we randomize this y-axis? And when I was like walking, and by the way, I saw some shit. Okay, I saw a dead deer during this thing, and like freshly dead, like probably died the other day. And I got jump scared. I thought it was like a statue. So I imagine it got hit by a car because it was on the side of the road, but I don't really know. So what I was thinking is like, why don't we just use the random value thing, which seems like it makes sense. We randomize the value on the y-axis, and it's good. The issue is it does randomize it, but we can't like take this data back in a sense, and there's really no interpol. It's like every point gets its own random value, but there's no random values in between here. And if we want to animate a ship first dodging this one and this one, there has to be something that happens in between these asteroids. So I fully understand that you have no idea what I'm talking about. The solution ended up being, though, we use noise texture instead, another source of randomness, which for some reason you use factor. It doesn't really do anything, but you use color, and now it works, although it kind of seemed to work on either of these cases here. No, they're all in a line. I don't know if this is a glitch or what, but you need color. So this is another source of randomness, but just like in the shader editor, noise texture is continuous. It has random values everywhere in between. So you kind of want to think about it. Sorry about that burp. You want to think about it like we have random values in a continuum along this line instead of just at the points. And I'm adding in this color ramp, by the way. Why am I adding in this color ramp? And while we do this, I actually don't want to see the spheres, just the line. I'm adding in the color ramp because for some reason the noise texture just makes random values between like 0.5 and 0.7. We want it to go between 0 and 1. Like none of this is hitting the floor. So I'm just going to use this color ramp to kind of clamp this down, and we can make this more visible by saying, oh, random values, instead of going from 0 to 1, go from like 0 to 10. So now we kind of see a full range, and let's extend this line that we can just do to get more data. I just want to make sure the bottom values are touching the floor, but not so much that they're kind of like, in color correction, we call this clipping the blacks is what this is called, which is kind of like a weird term, crushing the blacks. And then the other one's clipping the whites. I don't know. But we want to make sure it's going all the way up. And in the same way as the thing from before, we don't want all the whites to clip up here. So I'm just using this to kind of find the maximum contrast. And this even seems like too much. There we go. So now, long story short, we've now generated random numbers that go from, it kind of depends on what this is, but from 0 to 10 or 0 to 5. So some of them are touching the floor, some of them are up here. And now we instance the sphere is in, boop. We have, some randomness going on. Now, we've generated this random asteroid thing, and it's completely procedural in the sense that, we can change the position here by just changing the noise texture. But I was talking about before how this is a very important way to randomize it because now we can actually have a ship dodge this. So how do we do that? Well, you can't just like use a cube object or something. So we could just use a cube, for example, let's say, as our ship for now. You can't just say, oh, take this position and like use it as a transform for the cube, right? Like we want to say, oh, if we know where the asteroids are, we can have it dodge relative to that. What you can see makes this like red line. It's because of this whole field thing, which is why it's so confusing. You can't just have an object take this data. We need to always be using instances, something with an index, etc. So this is where it gets weird. So for the noise texture, I'm actually going to use this index node, which basically says each of these points has an index value, right? Like our line is a bunch of points. The first one is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So I'm just saying reference this instead of something random, because this lets us actually control it. And what I want to do is I want to have a cube, but in an instance form. So I'm going to do something a bit weird here. I'm going to use a mesh line. I'm going to make a line with a single point. In other words, I'm just making a dot. So this is just a clever, it's not clever. It's just a way to make a point. You know, if we made it more points, it would, you know, be longer. But we just want to have it be a point. And on that point, we are going to instance I mean, it could be anything. Maybe, is there no Suzanne primitive? There really isn't there? Well, okay, I guess we'll use a cube for now. They really dropped the ball there. So you can see now this is just kind of like a very bizarre way of adding in a cube, but it's actually at an instance, which means we can actually use fields and stuff now, as you can see. I'm just going to join these together. So now we have both of them happening here. And now, as I was implying, there is a way, in the same way that we set positions for the line, we can now set positions for the thing. Is this even understandable? I don't know. So we're going to set position. And we can kind of, you know, just kind of reuse this, but we want to do it in a way where, I mean, the issue with doing it like this is the index for the line is each asteroid has its own index number and it's going to be randomized. The cube only has one, so, you know, we kind of have to animate it in a sense. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all this, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to take this, I'm going to set it as the position, and the only difference between this chain and this chain, which are identical currently, is I'm going to add in a math addition. This is going to be our sneaky way of changing the index. So for example, right now we are at index 0. We can change it to index 1, so you can see it matches with this asteroid. Index 2, now you can see it would match with this asteroid if it was moving across. And then 3, 4, 5, so now we're at this one. 6, this one, etc. So long story short, what have we done here? We've made a system where the cube can know the position of each asteroid numerically. So as we go down the list, down the indexes, we can say, oh, we're going to be at this position. And again, the reason we use the noise texture is we can't just we can do more than just put in the integers, right? We can go in between them, and it's jittery as fuck right now. But you can see there's somehow some data in between there, which is going to be our like animation for the motion. So for now, let's just animate this thing. So for the asteroids, I'm basically going to generate a bunch of them in a line and then have them sweep to the left. And I want to tell more walking stories because I need to get more off my chest. But this deer, dude, it was fucking weird. It was freshly killed. I'm assuming hit by a car. It wasn't like too far off the road. Its butthole was bleeding. I'm glad I didn't take a photo because like I don't want to experience that again. But I saw a lot of roadkill on the road. I saw deer. I saw a bunch of squirrels. I saw an otter, I think, at some point. There's just a lot of dead stuff on the road. There needs to be some kind of fence or something to, because it's not just that. Once there are animals on the road, other animals will go eat it, right? And then they get hit. So that's kind of the issue. That's why roadkill has to be removed. Either way, so if we set position and use another vector math, you can see now we can shift it, right? Because we're taking the position and we're shifting it. And yes, we're adding this randomization, but for this shifting, what I'm thinking we can do is we can just animate this thing on exclusively the x-axis, and I want to have control over that. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the good old drivers. We should speed up here. We have been going for a while. So hash frame gives us the frame number. That's what it does. So on frame 1, it gives us 1, etc. I'm going to divide that by like a number like 20, so it goes 20 times slower. And you can see, wow, asteroids. You're going the wrong way. Come back. To fix this, just make this a negative number. And you can see we've animated these asteroids. In fact, let's make this something we can control a bit more. So instead of just putting in negative 20, I'm going to do it like this. So I'm going to make it so that we actually have a value node that lets us control this. So we have a number we can put in here, 20, and then, you know, you multiply it by negative 1, so it goes the right way, and then it goes like that. So I can make it go faster or slower, but we have control over this. Now to actually have the cube animate, and we know that it can, go to the correct spot. So whenever, let's say the second, so it goes 0, 1, 2. Whenever the second asteroid is passing through, this better be equal to 2, so it matches. And when the next one is there, it better be equal to 3. And then it ends up being pretty simple. Again, so like all we need to do, is animate this one, this index change. We just animate it using the same kind of process. So it's going to be hash frame divided by, in this case, 20, but it could be anything. So let's just connect this here. So let's see how this does. It might be incorrect. Let's find out. So it's kind of hard to tell because it's so glitchy, but let's go frame by frame. So I'm going to kind of skip the first asteroid because the index is equal to 0, and that's a bit weird. And it's because technically this starts off out. So if we do frame -1, yeah, that should be it. So let's see. When the second asteroid passes through exactly on the y-axis, you can see it matches. And then when the next asteroid goes through, it matches. And yes, there's a lot of noise in between, but technically we have a system where the ship knows where the asteroid is. So to clean this up, you're like, okay, we have all this chaos. To clean this up, it's basically the randomness is generated by this noise texture. So if we can make the noise texture less chaotic, well, that should make the motion less chaotic. So just take the scale and bring it down. By the way, whatever you do to one, do to the other. So it's using the same randomness, so they're relative to each other. So you can see here, it's already cleaned up a bit. So again, it's going to the asteroid position. There's just a lot of noise in between. So I'm just going to keep bringing down the scale until it looks a bit smoother. So now you see we actually have something that's more workable. Now, of course, this is the opposite of what we want. We don't want the cube going to the asteroids. We want them dodging it. But you can see it works. So I'm going to take the detail, bring it down. That's another source of randomness. And I think this looks pretty good. So without thinking too much, let's give this thing some primitive AI, which is to say not artificial intelligence. It's a mockery to the coats, as we call them, over there in some lab doing some neural network stuff. We're just going to do some dumb shit, but I feel like you put it on a resume, you say, oh yes, I made a asteroid collision detector. They'd be like, oh, that's interesting. But really what we're going to do is instead of saying go to the same position, because right now it's, again, the same node network to kind of offset the position, right? With this index change. It's the same thing. Instead of that, for this one, we're going to say, instead of going to the same position, maybe go to it with an offset of 0.5 and so on. So what I mean is no matter what, it's going to have 50% distance away from it. Okay, let's do something a bit simpler before we get to that. So what about, just so you understand, what if on this version, we have a flipped color ramp? In other words, when it has one asteroid position, it's going to go to the opposite end of the spectrum. So it's going to do the maximum dodge it can do. Well, that already works. So you can see when this asteroid's at the top, if you think about this as going from 0 to 1, we multiplied it by 6, but going from 0 to 1, when this is equal to 1, the ship goes to 0. Now, this kind of generally works, except, again, when an asteroid's exacting the middle 0.5, the flip of that is also 0.5, so it will meet the asteroids in the middle, but it will dodge the ones at the extremes. So it half works, but that's a bad version of what we could do. Instead, let's have this thing just, figure out where it's going to be, and then we're just going to move it by 0.5 units. So I'm going to, get the asteroid position. I'm going to add 0.5, and then, in case it goes over, as you can see. So this is a good dodging system. No matter where the asteroid is, it's going to be 0.5 units away, right? Instead of that, we want to make sure that it can also go back down so it doesn't go above all the asteroids. Hopefully this makes sense. We're going to do that with fraction. We need to find fraction. Where the fuck is it? There it is. And the nice thing about fraction, the way fraction works, by the way, is if the number goes over 1, it just rounds back down, right? It only takes everything after the decimal. The nice thing about this is it kind of has this Pac-Man teleportation effect, where if it goes to the top of the screen, it will go back down. And that will make it actually kind of video gamey. So you can see it's kind of working. The only thing that kind of looks weird is it's dodging the asteroids, but sometimes the side of it's clipping. This is just because, and this is something we can play around with. This is just because these things are so big. You make them smaller, that'll leave more room for dodges. And it's still not working perfectly. But, generally, you make the asteroids a bit smaller, all this, it should work. So let's make these asteroids a bit smaller. And you can see in general, now we have like a no collision system. And we know it's going to work for sure, because for every asteroid, it knows the position. It's going to move up 0.5 and, round if it needs to. So there's our very primitive thing. Let's add a bit of complexity, just so it looks a bit more dynamic. Two things we can do is, instead of just having it always be 0.5 away, we could have it vary. So sometimes it can only dodge by 0.4 units or 0.6, just so it adds a bit more dynamicness while still ensuring that, it's always going to dodge. So I'm going to take a sine function, divide it by, we're going to take a sine function and have it animate. So I'm going to take the frame number, divide by 20, the drill. And this goes from -1 to 1. So I want to remap this from -1 to 1 to I don't know. So again, generally it's going to dodge by 0.5. What if instead we have it dodge either 0.4 or maybe 0.35 or 0.55? So there's a bit of variation there, so it's not going to dodge by the same amount. Let's see what that looks like. So this is just going to add in a good amount of variation, a bit of extra shake, where it's still going to dodge. It's so dumb. This isn't how a human would play, but it technically works. So that works. And by the way, the one thing that this can do that a human can't is we speed it up, and the logic carries over. It will always still dodge. But so that's okay. It works, but it's very not dynamic. And we could replace these with asteroids, make them all look different. But whatever, it's still not dynamic. So another way to add in a source of randomness for free that will actually make it look very good is these noise textures actually have a 4-dimensional mode, if you remember. There's a W slider, which is kind of like a seed value for these. If we change one, we get a different variation. And of course, if we change one, we want to change the other. So let's try to animate both of these together. Get ready. This is going to be cool. So let's take, how do we want to do this? Let's do the hash frame kind of thing. So hash frame, let's divide by 1 for now. Let's see what this looks like. Okay, well, it's there. It's a source of randomness. Let's make that a bit bigger so it goes smaller. So what's happening here is it's kind of changing the noise and carrying over the logic. So it's still going to work, but it just kind of looks weird. So let's keep dividing until it doesn't look so obvious that now there's a wave passing through this. So let's try 50, something like that. And kind of a consequence of this is, even though it's kind of like waves going up and down, it's going to look like some of these asteroids are now moving diagonally instead of just scanning over to the left. So let's try something like this. Yeah, now this is looking much more dynamic. It looks more like a game where some asteroids are coming one side and one another. Now it doesn't really make sense, because if this asteroid goes up here, it can't really go above it, so it's going to start curving back down eventually. But I don't think anybody's going to notice that. So it kind of looks good. And this also gives us another bonus of if we add a number here, so adding 0 or adding 10, this is now a seed value that we can use. So let's just kind of utilize that. So this is our seed value. So far, what parameters do we have? We have the speed, we have the seed value. I mean, we have many more that we're not accessing, like the noise parameters and stuff like this. And a lot of these hash frame things we could also animate the speed of. But this is generally the logic behind the asteroid, dodging thing. And now it's all a matter of making this look pretty. Now, assuming the logic's there, I guess we should test it, right? So let's try seed value 20. Now, if it kind of clips some of them, again, that's just because of the size of these things that we can change. But yeah, that looks good. Yeah. Okay. Well, I mean, there's our dodging system. I guess the next order of business is making this look good. So let's do that.